Chapter 5. Knowing he had to wake Mike the next morning, he was up, dressed, and in position before the duty officer arrived. Along with the other drummers throughout the camp, he beat out the rat-tat-tat reveille call to the sleeping men to bring the sleeping men to assembly. The soldiers ate breakfast quickly, dismantled the tents, stored them in the long train of wagons, which also carried ammunition, field equipment, and other supplies. The air crackled with excitement, and Mike's breathing quickened as uniformed men, full packs on their backs, assembled at the sound of the drum roll. Dragoons, resplendent in their colorful uniforms, and blue uniformed riders from Company 1 of the 2nd Kansas Mounted formed their units on the road, eager for orders to begin the march. Even the horses caught the excitement, snorting and tossing their heads as artillery was wheeled into place. Over the creak of wagon wheels, the shouted commands, the overall noisy bustle, 5 companies of cavalry, 6 companies of regular infantry and dragoons, and 10 companies of Kansas volunteers received their orders and fell into line to begin the trek toward Grand River in southwestern Missouri. Dust from the horses and wagons rose like a cloud. Soon a fine gray powder covered the eyebrows and beards of Mike's fellow marchers. The drums set the pace for the first few minutes, after which the men fell to a slower, less measured walk. Some of the soldiers were fit and walked about complaint, but few stragglers groaned and lagged behind. Was there ever heat like this? Billy complained. He pulled off his forage cap to wipe his bald head with a muddy cotton handkerchief. Rivulets of sweat mixed with dust on his face trickled down in dirty streams. Harley Bott spoke up. Better get used to it. You got a long walk ahead of you. I was counting on fighting the enemy, not doing all this walking, Billy grumbled. All well and good, Harley countered, but you've got to get to the revs first, and the only way to do that is to put one foot ahead of the other and keep going. A messenger on horseback raced past, kicking up new clouds of dust that made Mike cough and rub his eyes. His stomach growled loudly. He realized how hungry he was. Harley turned to Mike. They should have plenty of provisions for our noon meal, but when supplies run low, they'll set us to foraging. Foraging? What's that mean? Mike asked. It means stopping at farmhouses, requesting whatever foodstuffs they've put by, whether it's corn from their fields, potatoes in their cellars, or hens from their barnyards. Do we buy 'em? Mike had thought of the pitifully small amount of money they carried with him. Harley grinned. No, we help ourselves. Citizens should be glad enough to aid the soldiers who are going off to battle to protect them. But to take a farmer's chickens is stealing, Mike protested. The memory of his copper theft in New York City and all the trouble it caused filled him with pain. Which is easier, give a few chickens or give a son to battle? Harley asked. Mike thought about his Kansas bunkmates who had left their farms and volunteered to fight. Some families give both. All the more reason, then, to feed Union soldiers. Guess so, Mike answered, but he was glad for a loud interruption from the conversation. Halt, Sergeant called, stomachs growling. The men lined up for their rations of dried beef and hardtack. Hearing the lapping of the small creek, Mike ran to it as soon as he'd eaten. He let the bubbling water run over his hands as he refilled his water bottle, and then he pulled off his cap and splashed into the cool water on his sweaty face and neck until they were clean. His pack and drum seemed to have gotten 10 times heavier in the course of the march. He would have given anything for a chance to crawl into a spot of the shade on the bank along the creek, bed for a long, deep sleep. But he barely had time to imagine such relief when he heard the sharp call for formation, and the march began again. Mike trudged along hour after hour, stopping only to wait as messengers on horseback raced at breakneck speed from the front of the line to the back and then to the front again. Conversations among those around him began to lag. Nothing seemed important enough or interesting enough to talk about, especially through the constant powdery, choking dust. Finally, to Mike's great relief, the long, straggling line of marchers was instructed to make camp for the night. Mike still had the drum calls to supper, then tattoo and taps. As soon as Mike had finished, Todd joined him, and the two of them found a patch of relatively smooth ground where they could spread out the rubber blankets. They beat the dust out of their clothes, took off their shoes, stretched out, rolling their woolen blankets up and over them. Todd yawned noisily and squirmed on his mat. I'll tell you this much, this is nothing like the feather mattress at my bed at home. Home, Mike repeated, but before he could finish the thought, he fell into a sound sleep. He awoke early in the morning as first light streaked the sky. He scrambled to get dressed and took his place with the drum. The moment he heard the command, Mike woke the sleeping man in his company with a sharp beat of a drum. The march, with so many men and so much equipment to move, proceeded slowly. Mike could only guess for the reasons for the countless steps. The heat became unbearable, but even the occasional rain shower, welcome as it was a mixed blessing. Musty, wet, woolen clothing, steamed dry in the sunlight, only worsened the stench of men who wouldn't remember when they'd last laid eyes on the bathtub. Mike crinkled his nose, eager for his exhausting, boring march to be over and the battle to begin. During the rest periods, the soldiers spoke of their loved ones. Some mournfully sang songs that reminded him of home. Mike, too, had pangs of longing for his family, but he worried most about Todd, who wore an expression of unrelieved sadness. As Billy reminisced about his wife and 2 small boys, a strangled sound, suspiciously like a sob, escaped from Todd. I've got 5 sisters, Todd mumbled. They're sweet little girls, all of them depending on me for protection ever since our father's company was set off to Virginia. Harley was blunt. Then why didn't you stay home with him? Why'd you sign up? As Todd hesitated, Mike quickly spoke. It won't do his sisters any good. If those Confederate rebels win the war, then what might happen to our country then? He clapped a firm hand on Todd's shoulder. Todd lifted his chin. That's right, he said. Mike and me, we heard the Federals were short of musicians. We knew the calls we were bound to serve. There was nothing short of pure selfishness to hide our talents, Mike added. Ben hooted at the bragging, but Mike insisted, out on the battlefield, you'll be mighty glad of our bugle and drum that are there to lead you on. Mike's exhaustion vanished. He grinned proudly at Todd, and Todd smiled back. But that night, after most of the men had gone to sleep, Mike lay awake, imagining himself bravely drumming as he spurred the men in Captain Dawes' company to attack. He heard muffled sobbing from under Todd's blanket. Mike reached out a hand, trying to comfort his friend. As he pulled back, he gave a couple of short, pretend snores, hoping Todd would think he was asleep, and lay very still. In a few minutes, Todd's sobs ended and gradually turned into slow, measured breathing as he slept. Mike could well remember what it was like to shed secret tears. When he was adopted as a foster child by the stern, unkind Mr. Friedrich, he'd spent many sleepless nights crying over Ma and the rest of his family, grieving over circumstances that caused them to be separated. Megan had been taken by a couple who farmed on the Kansas prairie. His oldest sister, Frances Mary, and 5-year-old Petey went to a childless couple from northeastern Kansas, and Danny and Peg had been chosen by a farmer and his wife who lived not too far from St. Joseph. It had been Danny who worked out a way for Ma to come west and join them, but only Peg lived with Ma and her new husband, John Murphy, a hardy Irishman. John and Ma and her new husband. A hardy Irishman, John might have been a loving father, but he couldn't financially support all of Ma's children, so Mike scarcely knew him. But after the heartache of losing Don and living with Mr. Friedrich, Mike had once again found a father. Along came Captain Joshua Taylor, strong, brave Captain Taylor, and his wife Louisa, who'd taken Mike to raise as a son. Mike sighed. Just when he needed a father the most, Captain Taylor had gone off to defend the Union. If the war had been shortened by a quick defeat of the South, then maybe life could be peaceful, and Mike would again know the joys and comforts of having a father. But until then, Mike drifted off asleep. In his dreams, a man, at times Captain Taylor, at times Daw, draped a comforting arm around his shoulders. The brigade began marching for a week under a July sun that burned hotter than a campfire, when orders were given to forage the evening meal. In a foraging detachment led by Sergeant Gridley, Mike was instructed to head for a group of nearby farmhouses. What will we do? Request whatever they can spare? He asked Sergeant Gridley. The sergeant's lip turned with amusement. I'm the one who does the talking, not you, Mikey boy. While the soldiers not too many years older than Mike snickered. We don't request, we take. Mike looked at the soldiers in the eye. You mean we steal? Simmer down, the sergeant ordered Mike. These are the wartime conditions. We follow emergency rules. I lived on a farm for a while, Mike said. A farmer can't survive if we take away what he grows and sells. Sergeant Gridley stopped and faced Mike. How about helping our soldiers survive? You see the great number of our brigade. How do you propose feeding them on a long march? Even with the sutlers' wagons, the local merchants coming to sell foodstuffs, we can't provide enough to fill the bellies of thousands of hungry men. Mike felt his face red, and he mumbled agreement. He couldn't imagine how much food it would take to feed an army. It was true. The men would have to have 3 meals a day to keep up their strength for the march. Sergeant Gridley motioned Mike to walk at his side as he and the 8 soldiers with him climbed the slope, leading to a trim white house with a large barn behind it. During wartime, Mike, people can lose everything. Their houses, possessions, their families. But they manage to survive and rebuild their lives. Taking a small amount of food is little to ask of a patriotic farmer. You'll see. As they approached the house, a woman stepped down the porch. We're Federal, she called out. We mean you no harm. Ma'am, the sergeant said, doffing his cap. He stood below the porch steps. His men behind him were in need of food. As are we, she said bitterly. Will you call your husband, please? I might speak to him. The woman leaned against the porch railing. Her stiff-backed courage seemed to slip away as she sighed. My husband's somewhere in eastern Missouri with General Lyon's forces. That's commendable, ma'am, Sergeant Gridley told her. There another man around your property we might speak to? My son's gone from home, too, she answered softly, almost as though she were talking to herself, Mike thought. Ab was bound and determined to run off to join the Missouri State Guard under Sterling Price. Rebel sympathizer? Mike blurted out, then clapped a hand over his mouth. Ma'am, Sergeant Gridley said, we'll respect the privacy of your house, but you got preserves to put by. We'd appreciate it if you'd bring them out. In the meantime, we're in need of potatoes or other vegetables from your root cellar if you've got chickens. The woman closed her eyes and waved her hand toward the barn. Go ahead. Take what you need. Just remember that my 2 daughters and I will need something to live on until our cash crop of oats can be harvested. Thank you, ma'am, the sergeant said. He quickly turned his men to the detachment and ordered groups to go in various directions. Finally, he came to Mike. There's bound to be chickens and eggs. You may find them in the hen house, maybe in the barn. Take a look. Collect wherever you can. Reluctantly, Mike trudged it to the rear of the house. He saw no signs of a hen house, but he heard a clucking sound coming from inside the closed doors of the barn, so he swung one of the big doors open and entered. The dimness inside the barn was of such contrast to the bright sunlight that for a moment Mike couldn't see, and he squinted, but something brown and squawking practically ran over his feet and into an empty horse stall. A fat hen, and where there was one, there was bound to be others, along with eggs they'd laid so far today. Mike, his eyes growing accustomed to the sparse light, followed the hen into the stall and bent down and made a grab for it. The hen loudly complained and tried to flap her wings in protest. As he rose, he heard a young girl's voice tearfully protesting, "Janie, he's got Miss Toosie." Mike looked up to see a child clutching the skirt of an older girl. Then he saw the gun. The older girl gazed at Mike from behind the long barrel of a rifle aimed right at his face.